Hello, and welcome to Buffy and the Art of Story, a podcast that recaps one episode of Buffy the Vampire Slayer at a time, focusing on its story elements. Today we're looking at Season 7, Episode 12, Potential, where Buffy trains potential slayers and Willow's spell to find a new one takes a surprising turn. I am Lisa M. Lilly, author of the Awakening Supernatural Thriller series and the Q.C. Davis crime novels, as well as the Writing as a Second Career books for writers. Along with the recap of Potential, today I'll be talking about the challenges of building to a twist that's surprising yet inevitable, revealing a character's inner conflict, here Buffy's about Spike, through dialogue and action, small movements that convey Dawn's emotional journey, and the changes to Buffy, Xander, and Dawn over these 7 seasons. As always, there will be no spoilers except in the foreshadowing section at the end. Remember, if you'd like to get more content about Buffy the Vampire Slayer, you can join the Patreon community at patreon.com/Lisa M. Lilly. That's L-I-S-A, M as in Marie, L-I-L-L-Y. At the second tier, you'll also get access to my self-study online course, How to Plot Your Novel from Idea to First Draft. Okay, let's dive into the Hellmouth. Potential aired the first time on January 21, 2003. It was written by Rebecca Rand Kirshner and directed by James A. Contner. It starts with an opening conflict to draw the reader in, and here it relates in an indirect way to the main plot. Rona and Violet, 2 potential slayers, walk alone in the graveyard. Out of nowhere, Spike knocks Rona aside, grabs Violet, and leans in to bite. Violet screams. He stops, says they're both dead, and asks why. Rona says because the black chick always gets it first. Buffy is there instructing all the potentials who have arrived so far, and she asks the question again. Rona says because Spike's a vampire and Rona doesn't have a slayer's strength or speed, it's not a fair fight. Spike, still holding Violet, asks if they think he cares it's not a fair fight. Violet stutters out a no, though she is not sure what lesson they're supposed to be learning here. Buffy concedes that they don't have Slayer strength, but the potentials do have abilities others don't. Speed, strength, instinct. This feels like a bit of general exposition for the audience coming out through conflict. And it is, but it does more because it foreshadows finding a new potential, and it sows the seeds that potential vampire slayers, while not slayers, do have some instincts, some skills that are innate. Buffy asks Rona what her instincts told her. Rona at first gives the answer she thinks the teacher wants. She was going to block the attack. But then she admits her instinct was to run. Violet agrees, and Buffy tells them to trust that, to run, get to higher ground, then fight. Buffy tells Spike to come after her, and she talks to the potentials about what she's doing as she fights. She gives them a bit of a pep talk, telling them they were chosen for a reason. She flips Spike onto the ground and gets on top of him, but then she fears she hurt him. She lifts his shirt a bit to check. The potentials definitely notice the chemistry between them. Rona says, "That's hot." Another one asks, are they supposed to make out with the vampires? And Violet warns Buffy that just when she thinks it's part of the lesson, he'll hurt your arm, and she points to her wrist. Buffy tells them to start again. It's Molly and Kennedy's turn, and at 3 minutes, 10 seconds, we go to credits. This first scene started undertones that will continue between Buffy and Spike. It's not quite a subplot for the episode. It's more of the running season arc. But this episode does something particular, which is to spotlight Buffy's inner conflict about her feelings for Spike. And we see it in a bit through some dialogue by Buffy, but a lot of it is called out by the potentials as they observe Buffy and Spike together. And then we'll see Spike's reaction to some of the things that Buffy says. On return from the credits, in the Summers basement, the potentials chatter, giggle, and bicker until Buffy flings an axe. It hits the center of a target on the wall, and she reminds them they're all going to die, sooner than most humans, and death is what a Slayer breathes, dreams about, and lives. She goes on that they think, based on Anya's sources, that the first evil is taking a break to regroup, but she warns it will come back stronger and better than before. Despite that warning, this idea that the first is taking a break makes it feel weak as an antagonist. And there are a lot of other reasons for that. That alone might not do it, but it contributes to that feeling of the first not being as ominous as it ought to be. I am adding that to my bonus episode about the first, which hopefully by the time you are listening will be available to patrons. Buffy gives a reason now for why the first needs to regroup. It was putting a lot of stock in the Ubervamp, at least she speculates that, and she refers to the Ubervamp as the Shaka Khan. Dawn is watching from her perch on the basement stairs. She's been very quiet, but she pipes in now to say Turakan. Buffy keeps talking, saying time is against them. Some of them will die in battle. And she says, decide now that it's not going to be you. She tells them she knows they're all tired and scared, but they're special. Most people have no idea why they're in the world, but they do. They have a mission. They're the chosen ones. Dawn looks down as Buffy stresses the mission and being chosen, and we know how she feels. In the beginning of the season, she was training with Buffy. Now Buffy's only training the potentials. I love that this is very understated, which we will see for Dawn through the first half of the episode. Dawn has grown so much since previous seasons, and she is able to feel her feelings and recognize that what Buffy is doing, training the potentials, has to take priority. Buffy heads upstairs and she, in passing, reminds Dawn to hurry up and eat breakfast so she's not late for school, unaware of Dawn's sadness, and also did not notice Dawn's contribution earlier. There are echoes here for Buffy of season 1 and season 2 when she was on the other side of this destiny talk. Never kill a boy on the first date sticks out to me, where Buffy breaks up with Owen or says she doesn't want to see him again to protect him, and Giles tells her about how he felt on learning that he was a watcher. Other times, Giles was a lot more tone deaf and did not get at all why Buffy wasn't thrilled that she had a destiny, unlike all the other high school students. Now Buffy is the one who has to deliver that message. Buffy is pacing as she talks. She's angry when they're joking and giggling and not paying attention. And that too is so different from Buffy seasons 1 through 3, always trying to have a normal life. Season 4 as well. Season 5 is when most of her life becomes about slaying and taking care of Dawn. And some of this is why probably seasons 1 through 3 appeal to me more. I enjoyed the fun of Buffy trying to be a normal high schooler. I enjoyed the metaphor to high school. This is much more the metaphor for adulthood, becoming an adult and discovering that there are things that your mentor, parents, teachers told you that you now need to echo, that you now need to draw upon. At the same time, we do get hints of Buffy as she was. Her calling the Ubervamp the Shaka Khan is very Buffy-like. Remember when she called Kakistos kissing toes and taquitos? So she's still Buffy, but she has grown and she has been through a lot. We're at 6 minutes 49 seconds. By now, we would normally have seen the story spark or inciting incident that sets the main plot rolling, but there hasn't been anything yet, and I don't think this next scene does that, though there is an argument for it. Buffy is at school. She's talking to Xander on the phone. She tells him to lock the door if he's going to shower at the house, foreshadowing a little bit of bickering later. She asks if Giles checked in yet. He was picking up someone in Shanghai. This explains Giles' absence from the episode and gives a little hint at the ongoing search for potentials. A student, Amanda, comes in for counseling. Amanda appeared in Help when Buffy saw the various students and was trying to figure out what was going to happen to Cassie, who died at the end. Amanda then was sick of a boy bullying her, so she slammed his face into the pavement and got sent to Buffy. This is not referenced in the episode, so you only know it if you recall Amanda from Help. You might argue this sets the episode in motion because Amanda appears later, and perhaps this meeting has a tiny bit to do with that, but by itself, it doesn't really start the main plot. Amanda asks if anyone ever thinks Buffy is weird. Buffy goes into a ramble about maybe but being charming, and then she cuts herself off and refocuses on Amanda. Amanda then says she thinks Amanda, might be weird because one of the guys who keeps picking on her is someone she thinks is cute. There's no way to know if this is the boy from the previous episode. I do not think so, because she says not only that she thinks he's cute, but that when she sees him, she wants to, pick on him. And her mom says if a boy teases her, it means he likes her. Buffy says that can be the case sometimes, and Amanda asks why they're mean to each other if they like each other. This sets Buffy off into another ramble, this time about mortal enemies, and that leads to no good, but then it's over, which it is. It's clear she's talking about Spike, and she ends by saying again that it's over. This rambling shows Buffy's inner conflict as well by her literally expressing it, though not terribly clearly. Amanda doesn't understand what she's saying, but we as the audience do. At some point, I'll have to dive into this more as well, but to me, the ramble shows more that the writers don't quite know what to do with Buffy and Spike. I'd have to look at that in a whole season context. I'll have to make a note to do that. As far as Buffy's character, there is a little bit of a season 1, 2, 3 Buffy feel to this, because Buffy always went off a little bit on tangents and then had to come back to the point. But usually her tangents were something like someone would say the whole 9 yards, and she would say, where does that come from anyway? Is it 9 yards of this? Is it about that? And then she'd come back to the point. It doesn't feel like Buffy to ramble off and just talk about how she feels. Maybe this is a result of her season 6 struggle with depression. This is one of the things, though, about Buffy season 7 that doesn't quite ring true to me. It feels more like a device. At 9 minutes into the episode, Buffy arrives home. Xander and the Potentials are bickering or really yelling, which upsets Andrew. And Buffy says she was only gone for a couple of hours. Willow intervenes and tells them all that the Coven reported there's another Potential, and she's been in Sunnydale all this time, but they don't know who or where she is. This, at last, feels like the story Spark. The episode is about finding the Potential and what that means for Dawn. This is pretty late in the episode, which contributes to the pacing feeling a little bit uneven. Probably it's done this way to set up the twist, a couple twists. First, that Dawn is the Potential, or thinks she is, and then second, that no, it's not really Dawn, it's Amanda. So we weave in Amanda early in a way that doesn't really stress her. We don't refer back to that time she smashed that kid's face in the parking lot, so we don't think she's particularly strong or tough. And we're distracted from Amanda by Buffy's rambling, and again think, oh, that scene is just there to basically fill time and to give us exposition about Buffy's struggles over her feelings about Spike and a little bit about how the students perceive Buffy. So we don't necessarily notice Amanda, yet she is introduced so that it doesn't feel out of place or odd when we see her later. So those are ways to start setting up her role in the story. All the same, it makes the episode feel slow on first watch, or at least unfocused. Buffy says she was planning to take the potentials out that night, but she doesn't want to risk the bringers finding the new potential first. Willow, Xander, and Dawn tell her to go. They'll do a spell, or Willow will, and they'll help to find the new potential. Before heading out, the potentials check out Buffy's weapons. Dawn warns them about pointing crossbows at people, and she refers to their, quote, little group patrol, end quote. One of them objects, no, it's more than that. It's an outing. They might get to kill something. Dawn says she's killed things sometimes, but they don't pay much attention. Andrew argues that he should be included, and he again compares himself to Spike as he did last episode. Buffy points out Spike was being controlled by the first. He didn't have free will, and Andrew did. And Andrew says, I hate my free will. The episode is about 12 minutes in. Usually right around here, we'd see the first major plot turn. It should come from outside the protagonist, spin the story in a new direction, and raise the stakes. I'm not too surprised we don't get it yet because that story spark came pretty late, but we are heading that direction. After the others leave, Willow puts together the ingredients for a spell and is a bit thwarted by Andrew, who is joking around and playing with her snake skin. Willow glares at him. Overall, she's pretty tolerant given their history. She just gives him that look. Andrew muses about what if every so often people wriggled out of their skin and left it behind. And he says, quote, talk about embarrassing, end quote. Andrew will express a few themes in the episode and metaphors, and this one is something of a theme for more than one character. I wonder if Andrew identifies with the snakeskin since he is, in a way, trying to become someone else, or at least convince others that he is no longer evil, which you could see as shedding his skin. This also could be foreshadowing of some later episodes, which I'll talk about in that section of the podcast. Dawn asks Willow if she thinks the potential goes to Sunnydale High, and Willow figures that's likely because she'd be right around that age. Dawn runs through a few of the girls she knows, one of whom fainted during fetal pig dissection, so she hopes it's not her. Side note, yes, we did used to dissect fetal pigs in high school. I do not think they do this anymore. Someone who is that age or has kids that age, please let me know. I didn't do it. I had a whole issue with dissecting in biology in junior high, and unfortunately, my run-in with the teacher led me to not take any science in high school. I think I've mentioned that before. It is one of the few regrets I really have about my schooling because that then kind of snowballed and led to my not pursuing paths that might have been really interesting to me. I had really, really loved science, biology, physics, chemistry in junior high. I guess they call it middle school now. And I didn't go on, which is too bad, although I'm not sorry I didn't dissect the fetal pig. Andrew exclaims about how killing a pig is wrong and so hard to do. A fun callback to his attempt to kill the pig for the first. Willow explains the spell will conjure a brilliant light, find the potential, and illuminate her with a glowing aura. Willow then enchants a map to track the potential's location. After she says the spell, she tosses the ingredients, which include an egg, into the fireplace. It smokes all over. It smells horrible. Everyone coughs. The light shimmies around the living room. And Anya thinks Willow messed up the spell again, which I can only think is a reference to the barrier spell in Showtime, which is kind of unfair of Anya because that was supposed to fail. Maybe she means the first taking Willow over. Again, that seems unfair, but not surprising that Anya would say it that way. Willow apologizes. She was sure it was going to work. Dawn goes to the front door, opens it to air out the room, but the light follows her. It throws her against the door, and the glowing light surrounds her, and Willow says, "I think it worked." And we go to commercial. So that happened at 14 minutes, 42 seconds. The whole episode is only a little over 40 minutes. So that is past the 1/3 mark. So it's not that late in the episode, and it is a really good major plot turn. It comes outside of Dawn, who it turns out is our protagonist. It spins the story in a new direction. It's now about Dawn dealing with this news, and it raises the stakes because now Dawn is directly in great danger, and her relationship with Buffy became more complicated. Creating compelling characters from the inside out is one of the most popular books in the Writing as a Second Career series. So I'm sharing with you an excerpt from the first chapter so you can see if you think it might be helpful for you. This is from Chapter 1, Beliefs and Values. You could spend all day imagining your character in different situations, and trying out scenarios is not a bad way to get to know your characters. For example, your protagonist is walking down the street. A well-dressed elderly woman holds out a sign asking for money. What does your protagonist do? Some of these types of questions are included in the book. If you're like me, though, unless it's a scene for your novel, a hypothetical scenario can feel like an exercise. I can walk through a writing exercise much as I can sit down and play scales on my guitar, but all of us have limited time, and I'm not convinced it's worth practicing scales for hours if I've got a concert to perform tomorrow night. The other issue with specific scenes is the many variables. Take the woman asking for money. Is she friendly in her approach? Aggressive? Does the protagonist perceive her as needing money? Has the protagonist just lost his job? Does he have hospital bills for an ill daughter to pay? A single scene requires a lot of context. If I'm going to figure all of that out, I'd rather focus on scenes for a story. For that reason, this book poses questions designed to reveal big picture beliefs and values that will affect many aspects of your characters and their lives. For many of these, I've drawn from the work of self-help business guru Anthony Robbins, who has spent his career figuring out how to help people make the most of their lives. If you haven't read Awaken the Giant Within, I highly recommend it. Whether or not you find it useful on a personal level, it's a great examination of character. In particular, it examines global values and beliefs. By beliefs, I don't mean religious beliefs, though those might matter. Instead, we'll focus on your character's overarching views about life, people, and the world. Similarly, for values, you'll want to consider not only the values we hear about on the political front, such as traditional values, but personal values, as in what is most important to your character for her happiness, well-being, and place in the world. That is just the beginning of Chapter 1. In the next break, I'll share another excerpt specifically about how to explore your character's beliefs. In the meantime, if you want to find creating compelling characters from the inside out, you can find it in all the Writing as a Second Career books at writingasasecondcareer.com. I just said in passing, Dawn is our protagonist. The fact that we did not know that until now is one of the things that's tricky about the episode, but not unusual in this season where so much of it is about carrying the series arcs forward. The other potential protagonists would be Buffy, who we've seen a lot of, and Amanda, who we'll see later. When looking at who the protagonist is, I look at three things: who's pursuing an active goal throughout the episode, who is the main point of view character, and who has the most at stake. If your character answers all three, you've got a really clear protagonist. You don't have to have that be the case, but if everything's fuzzy, that makes for a fuzzy story, to use a technical term. So here, who's actively pursuing a goal before we get, or even up to this point? Amanda wants Buffy's advice, but that's not really a focus of even this part of the episode. Buffy has the goal of training the potentials and preparing them. That's an ongoing goal, and it will be part of the episode as we go forward. And Dawn is really interesting because now that we see this happening to her, we can go back and think maybe Dawn does have an active goal, or at least some unconscious goal of finding her place in this world where there are all these potential slayers. She had just achieved what she wanted for so long, which was for Buffy to take her seriously, to be able to contribute to fight with Buffy at least some of the time. She got there at the end of season 6. We saw Buffy starting to train her in the beginning of season 7. Then the potentials arrive, and that's pretty much dropped. And we see this sadness in Dawn. Then she tries to tell the potentials a little of what she knows, and her scoffing at their little group patrol shows how she feels left out. Can you have an unconscious goal that's also active? I think yes. And maybe she is aware of it. We don't know because it's so subtle. But this is an example of how you can have small character moments. How active a character is depends on who they are, and it is relative. For Buffy, these tiny moments wouldn't feel like an active goal because Buffy is in the forefront of most stories, less so in these last couple of seasons, but generally she is a physically active character. She operates on a large scale, sometimes an epic scale, but Dawn does not. Dawn is, especially this season, a quieter character. She's a little more in the background, so these moments can be significant. Is she the main point of view character? Up to this point, not really, though we do see the scenes with the potentials when she's in them more or less through her eyes, but we also see through Buffy's eyes. Now, the second half of the episode will be more clearly Dawn's point of view, so that weighs more on the side of Dawn than Buffy. In fact, it becomes pretty clear between the two of them that Dawn has the main plot. And that is partly because of the who has most at stake question. Buffy doesn't have a lot at stake in this episode other than the ongoing she wants to prepare the potential. She has a ton at stake in that sense. But for this particular story, Buffy herself isn't in any danger at any point, and she's not really in emotional peril. Dawn, on the other hand, from this point on, has a lot of emotional peril, and she's going to put herself in physical danger. Finally, there's Amanda. I missed her on the point of view aspect. She could have been a protagonist in this type of story, but we really don't get her point of view. When she met with Buffy earlier, we were mainly seeing the scene through Buffy's eyes. When she interacts with Dawn, mostly the audience is focused on Dawn, not Amanda. And it is Dawn we end the episode with and her feelings that we explore in depth. So for those reasons, Dawn is the protagonist, but the fuzziness about it is part of what makes the episode's pacing feel a little off, at least on first watch, when we're not clear what the story is about. On return from the commercial, Dawn is quite spooked by the idea that she's a potential slayer, and everyone else is shocked too. Anya observes that 1 second Dawn's a klutzy kleptomaniac teenager with fake memories, and suddenly she's a hero, quote, with a much abbreviated lifespan, end quote. And again, this feels like Anya reiterating some exposition for the audience, and it's great having Anya do it because she's funny, being so blunt. And there's conflict there because no one wants to be referred to that way. But once more, what the writers are doing is planting seeds. Buffy earlier told us potentials have some instincts and skills already. Anya is reminding us Dawn is klutzy, which we have seen here and there. I don't know that Dawn is that much klutzier than anyone else, but that's part of the point. She doesn't seem to have the Slayer's skills. However, on first watch, we don't focus on that because Willow jumps in and says it sort of makes sense, given that thing about Buffy and Dawn sharing the same blood. This immediately, as an audience member, makes me think, oh yeah, right. It's a question I've had throughout the season. If Dawn is really made from Buffy, why isn't she a potential Slayer? It makes perfect sense. After Willow says that about the blood, Anya says, yeah, I never got that. And I love that because it is the writers echoing a question that many audience members may have. I have the question, pretty sure I talked about it in season 5. The Summer's blood, it's Summer's blood, feels a bit wedged in when the writers need it in season 5. Perhaps they planned it the whole time, but it isn't clear early on. Whenever Buffy says the monks made her out of me, that too felt a little bit added in to up the emotional stakes, and then it sets up the ending. It may have been there earlier in the season, but Buffy has so little time with that monk in season 5 who tells her about making the key human that none of that gets in. The blood made her out of me. None of that is there. It may be in the diary that Dawn reads. I'd have to go back and look, but it's pretty subtle. And I like that Anya basically points that out and is like, well, I don't get that. That's a nice way to deal with something when your audience might be thinking the same thing. Plus, it further takes our mind off Anya's point or Anya's passing reference to Dawn being klutzy. Dawn now says if she ever became a Slayer, that would mean that Buffy had died. Willow wants to call Buffy, but then remembers she can't. Buffy didn't bring her cell phone with her, which also was a thing back then for those that don't remember it. I got a cell phone relatively late, and the early ones were not smartphones, so all you could do with them was call, maybe text, but it was very difficult because you just had numbers, not a keyboard, and I rarely brought it with me unless I knew I was going on a long drive and I might need to call for directions or call someone and tell them I was running late. I didn't start carrying it until I had an incident when I was walking to work, when I used to work all kinds of crazy hours very early on a Saturday morning, and some guys started following me in their car and I was having trouble getting away from them. Obviously I did, but boy, did I wish I had my phone at that time to at least dial 911 before something happened. And after that, I started carrying it, but I did not before. So it is believable to me that at the time this was made, Buffy might leave without her phone. And Dawn comments, sure, she didn't bring it with because, quote, all the important people are with her, end quote. Xander tells Dawn she's important now. Dawn asks what happens to her life. She guesses she'll train with the potentials. Anya chimes in that they'll have to protect her from the eyeless guys with the sharp, sharp knives. Willow tries to reassure her when Dawn worries that the Bringers saw the spell. She's getting really anxious. Andrew walks in and asks what's going on, and Anya tells him Dawn is going to be a Slayer. Andrew says, holy crap, plucked from an ordinary life, handed a destiny. Xander says, say Skywalker and I smack you. Dawn tells them not to tell Buffy yet. She needs to think about it. And she refers to Joyce saying something about Buffy that makes her think Buffy won't be happy for her. Then Dawn adds she's not even sure she's happy for herself. She goes up to her room to get some space. Anya tells Xander if Dawn gets to be a Slayer, her life will be short and brutal. But Willow objects that it isn't like that and says it's like she's part of this huge power. I know what that feels like. It feels wonderful. This is really nice to hear from Willow after all her struggles with magic, that this is how she feels. Andrew now again articulates a theme and a metaphor. He says, yes, Willow so captured it. It's like, well, it's almost like this metaphor for womanhood, isn't it? The sort of flowering that happens when a girl realizes that she's part of a fertile heritage stretching back to Eve. And Xander says, I'll pay you to talk about Star Wars again. Anya, though, points out it's not about power. It's about that Dawn might have an early death. They debate whether to go find Buffy and whether the ghost Dawn saw was really Joyce. Xander talks about what it'll mean to Buffy, and he doubts she really wants this for Dawn. Anya reminds them about the sharp, sharp knives and the brutal life. Xander then says Dawn can handle it. She's chosen. Dawn upstairs hears all this, looks in the mirror, and says, I'm chosen. Anya agrees with Xander that they shouldn't rush Dawn into dealing with this. Quote, rushing's only going to get her killed, end quote. But Dawn, overloaded, sneaks out her bedroom window. This is very like Dawn in earlier seasons. And at the same time, it is different. When Dawn went out the window or raced out the back door in earlier seasons, it was reckless. And it was because she was so overwhelmed by feelings. This was the Dawn a lot of us didn't love because she was always screaming and crying and doing things like rushing out in the night to get herself killed. Not that she was trying to get herself killed, but putting herself in grave danger, which just seemed so reckless and clueless. Turns out, we'll find out it is still pretty reckless, but Dawn has reason to think it's not. She believes she has Slayer instincts and strength and coordination, and to be fair, she has a lot more training from Buffy now. Even not being a potential Slayer, Dawn is much more able to handle herself than in those earlier seasons. We're about 20 minutes through the episode, so it is right about the midpoint of it. Usually here we'll see a major reversal for the protagonist or a major commitment, throwing caution to the wind. You could see climbing out the window as that, Dawn saying, I'm a potential Slayer, I'm going to climb out the window. You could see believing she's a potential as a reversal, given what it means, the sharp, sharp knives. But there is a much bigger commitment Dawn makes later, and I feel like that is the real throwing caution to the wind. Here, there is enough of that pattern of Dawn's to escape, to run away, that this doesn't feel like as big a commitment for Dawn. She might be more prepared to go out into the night than she was in earlier seasons, but she still seems to be acting sort of out of a default. Lots of turmoil, head out the window. Before we follow Dawn, though, we go to Buffy and Spike, who take the potentials to a demon bar. For whatever reason, it doesn't seem to be Willie's. I don't think we see Willie's again. I should probably do some research and see what happened to the actor. Maybe he wasn't available anymore, but it is a demon bar, and Spike threatens a demon who thanks him for bringing snacks, meaning the potentials. Buffy explains to the girls why she would come here, to scare someone, to make contact, get information. One potential wants a strong drink, and Buffy first says no, but when they all push back, she tells them go ahead. Down all the yak urine shots they want. This grosses them out. Spike agrees that it's awful. The prices charged here ought to get you human blood. And they all look shocked, and he reminds them that he's a vampire. So Spike, too, is reminding the audience and reminding the potentials that he's a vampire. This goes hand in hand with reminders about Buffy's attraction to him. For now, Buffy tells the potentials there's not a being in there who wouldn't gladly rip their hearts out. Then this is immediately subverted for humor, which I really enjoy. Buffy does this so well, because right after she says that, Clem sees her and calls her name, and he and Buffy hug. Kennedy jokes about whether Buffy might have dated him too. Buffy takes Clem aside. When they return, he leans into the circle of potentials, acting like he's about to tell them secret information. But instead, we see from behind that his face must be expanding. These sneaky tentacles burst out all over, and all the potentials screech in fear. Outside on the streets of Sunnydale, Dawn runs into Amanda. They're both a bit awkward and say they are just out walking. Amanda has a scratch on her head, and Dawn asks about it. After some reassurance that Dawn has seen weird things too, Amanda tells Dawn that she tore her sweater in swing choir, the striped ones they wear, and she went to get a new one. Everyone was gone when she got back, and it was echoey and lonely. These details and this setting the scene are a great illustration if you are writing a story that brings in speculative elements, whether it's sci-fi, horror. You set the stage and draw the audience in by drawing them into the character's ordinary life, giving them very concrete things to hold on to so they envision the scene, they're right there with the character, they completely believe it, and then you bring in the vampire or the robot or whatever it is. And because the audience has already bought into your world, they are now willing to buy into that element of the story. Amanda, consciously or not, does that when talking to Dawn. She then says a guy or a thing, it scratched her. She dodged, it hit its head, and it was messed up in the face. Dawn asks if it really, quote, scratched with its teeth, end quote. And Amanda asks her, was it real? Was it a vampire? And then says she's probably crazy. But Dawn believes her, and Amanda says after it hit its head, she locked it in a classroom. This too sows seeds for the real twist at the end when we find out Amanda is the new potential. Because if we think back, it fits Amanda in her first encounter with a vampire. She didn't even know vampires existed, yet she not only got away after it tried to bite her, she locked it up. But we don't focus on that because we are thinking about Dawn and are so concerned with what being a potential means for Dawn. This also looks like running into Amanda is a way for Dawn to test out her skills. So that is another reason on first watch, we aren't thinking, oh, Amanda must be a potential. She just seems like another student. It feels like we saw her earlier just so that she would be familiar and we'd understand why Dawn knows who she is. A thematic element in what Amanda says is she refers to the vampire after saying it was a guy or maybe a thing as it, and we're going to see that again. This further emphasizes that conflict that Buffy has, even though Buffy's not in the scene, that vampires are not human. This vampire isn't it. Amanda now says she was looking for Buffy. She heard rumors about her. Some kids think she's a high-functioning schizophrenic, but Amanda also heard she might be able to help with this kind of thing. So this is why that first scene feels unnecessary to me. Amanda just explained why she came looking for Buffy. Dawn now tells Amanda that Buffy is out, but she'll handle this. This is the big commitment, the big throwing of caution to the wind by Dawn, because not only is she out in the night where she might get attacked, she is going to seek out a vampire that already attacked Amanda. This is nearly 25 minutes in, so it's fairly late for that major commitment by Dawn, but there is so much going on, and the other things came later that works pretty well. This is from a little later in Chapter 1 from Creating Compelling Characters from the Inside Out, a section entitled Your Character's Beliefs. An example of a global belief a character might hold is that people are generally honest or generally dishonest. Whether that belief or any belief is empowering or disempowering depends on the situation. A character who believes people are generally honest may be happy because he feels free to be open and honest and trusts people enough to form close bonds. But the same belief could be disempowering if it leads him to put too much trust in a business partner who is embezzling. Either way, people tend to see the world through the lens of their beliefs. If at her first job, your character finds the supervisor overbearing and unfair, but at the next job, your character thrives and works well with the boss, then the issue with the first job probably was that supervisor. If your character gets a second job, though, and the supervisor is overbearing and unfair, and it's the same deal at the third job and the fourth, the common denominator is probably the character's beliefs about work, people, teamwork, or herself. Similarly, if your character is well liked at nearly every workplace or is able to work with particularly difficult people, or enjoys every job she has, that person likely has global beliefs that influence or even cause that. Does your character hold any of these beliefs? The little guy always gets the short end of the stick. Anyone with power is corrupt. No one ever likes me. Workplaces are full of gossip and backbiting. Every person has some good in her. Most people do what's right. Learning to get along with people is a worthwhile skill that makes life better. It's more important to be kind than to be right. Most people like me. I can find something to like about almost any job, person, or situation. These types of beliefs are global because they tend to influence not only job satisfaction, but how the character views friendships, romantic relationships, volunteer work, hobbies, politics, and any other area of life you can think of. What are some other beliefs your character holds about people, life, themselves? If you think this book might be helpful to you, or you just want to read a larger sample, you can find links at writingasasecondcareer.com. Creating compelling characters from the inside out is available in ebook, workbook, hardback, large print, and audiobook editions. The reason that I personally pulled it out now is I am working on my new supernatural thriller series. I'm in the planning stages, and it is the first time in a long time that I have created brand new characters rather than returning to a series where at least 3 or 4 characters, if not more, are already established. So I am going back and looking at these types of questions. For all the books and other articles on fiction writing, check out writingasasecondcareer.com. Amanda and Dawn break into the high school. Dawn falls as she climbs through the window. This is played for comedy, so as an audience, we don't necessarily think, oh, maybe she's not the potential, but it sows another seed for later. Overall, this episode does such a good job of building to the twist. In one of my favorite podcasts, they coined it, a Mad Men podcast that my friend Roberta Lipp co-hosts. She talks about developments in the plot should be surprising but inevitable. And that is what we want in a twist. It should surprise the audience, maybe shock the audience, but if you look back at what happened before, it feels inevitable. And Dawn falling through that window is part of that. Ironically, Dawn now reassures Amanda she can handle this. It's mostly instinct, she thinks, and that fits with Buffy's earlier comments to the potentials about trusting their instincts. Amanda now asks if they have to kill the vampire and half-jokingly says if they urged it toward the band, the way they looked down on Swing Crier, it might be funny. Dawn tells Amanda some of what she knows about vampires, and when Amanda says Dawn's a monster expert, Dawn says it runs in the family, again shoring up our view that Dawn is really a potential. When they find the classroom where Amanda locked the vampire in, it appears to be empty and the door is unlocked. They worry the vampire got out, but unknown to them, it is hiding inside up on the ceiling, and we cut to a commercial. So a great hook, lots of great hooks in this episode. We return and Dawn and Amanda are about to close the door, but the vampire jumps down. They scream and run until they can't go any farther because the corridor is blocked. Dawn grabs a fire extinguisher from the wall and she knocks the vampire around with it. The scene cuts to Buffy and Spike. They lead the potentials into a crypt. Buffy says a vampire is an animal. Sometimes it's in packs, sometimes it lives alone, and asks them how they can tell that this is a vampire nest. One says only a vampire could live like this because it's pretty much of a mess. Spike agrees that these vampires are seriously lacking in taste, but tells them it's not true for all of them. And Buffy says he has a point. Vampires can live anywhere, any way they want, but, quote, the animal inside always the same, end quote. And Spike gives her a look. So more tension there. I'm sure Buffy has referred to vampires as animals before, but it's not super common. And I'm sure it is deliberate in this episode, showing more of that conflict Buffy has over her view of vampires, her role as the Slayer, and her feelings for Spike. Molly asks Spike where he lived, and he tells them in a crypt, but a nice one. Buffy agrees it was comfy. Kennedy asks when she found it comfy. Buffy ignores that and tells them look around. The potentials find what they think is a dead body, but when Buffy shakes it, it turns out it's a vampire and it growls. The scene cuts to Dawn and Amanda. We're about 30 minutes into the episode. They run into another classroom and barricade the door with a large file cabinet. They sink to the floor and huddle against that door. Amanda asks if they're safe as the vampire slams into the other side of the door. So around here, we should see the last major plot turn. It should grow from the midpoint, take the story in another new direction, and further raise the stakes. Amanda has asked if they are safe, and now Buffy tells the potentials nowhere is safe. And the scene starts cutting back and forth pretty quickly from Dawn and Amanda to Buffy fighting the vampire and instructing the potentials. Dawn tells Amanda she has a plan, but also admits that she has no idea what she's doing. A nice showing of vulnerability by Dawn, which further shows her strength. She is confident enough that she's a potential to be able to admit she doesn't know exactly what she's doing, and Amanda tells her she's done pretty well for them so far. But at 31 minutes, 32 seconds, the vampire breaks through the classroom door. The scene cuts to Buffy fighting and telling the potentials what to do, and her instructions continue in voiceover when we go back to Dawn and Amanda. Buffy tells the potentials everything is a weapon as Dawn throws beakers, they're in the science lab, at the vampire. Buffy says Slayers need to use what's in the environment to see what's around them, and Dawn grabs a flagpole to fight with. But Dawn struggles to break the pole free of the flag, and Buffy warns that make one mistake and it's over. Right then, the vampire gets the better of Dawn. She's on the floor on her back. The vampire pins her, about to bite. The scene cuts to Buffy. She drops her stake and she and Spike leave the crypt and shut the doors. The vampire advances on the potentials. Dire circumstances in both scenarios. Dawn's about to get bitten. The potentials are locked in, and we cut to a quieter scene. So this is a great way to keep the tension high while we deal with something that shows characters not in peril at this moment. Willow knocks on Dawn's door. Anya says she's been sulking in there forever, but when they go in, the friends discover Dawn took off through the window. Willow sets up a locator spell, or maybe she goes and gets that map that was supposed to be able to locate the potential before. Meanwhile, Dawn cries out for Amanda's help, but Amanda says she can't. Then bringers break through the windows and head straight for Amanda. They surprise the vampire too, who lets go, and Dawn gets in a good kick and gets away from it as the bringers start to drag Amanda off. Dawn says, "You don't want her, you want me." And we cut to a commercial. We're in the climax. It probably started a little bit earlier, but the climax is where the opposing forces have their final clash and the main plot conflict resolves. On return from the commercial, the bringers have a very frightened Amanda, and Dawn turns on a burner. So she's still using what's at hand, and flames billow out at the bringers. Dawn and Amanda escape. Out in the hallway, Dawn says to a very frightened and shaken Amanda, "Remember when you said I was special? Well, I'm not. But the thing is, you are. This is your battle, Amanda." Xander walks in. He overhears the conversation. Amanda says she can't, but Dawn tells her she can. It's something she has to do, something she was born to do. And Dawn says, "Here, this belongs to you," and hands over that pole. And that is the climax of the episode. The The main plot ultimately is Dawn trying to find her place, or wanting to have a place with the potentials. That's probably more accurate. Dawn wants to be part of the group with the potentials and Buffy. It is an emotional plot, but it plays out, as so often is the case, through action when Dawn gives Amanda that flagpole to fight with. It's easy to miss that moment as the climax. We'd never miss it because it's so emotional and so powerful. It doesn't quite feel like a climax because we're in essentially an action show. Right before it, we have the action scene with the vampire and Dawn and the bringers and Dawn and Amanda. And after it, we'll have another big action scene. And this small moment comes in between, but is so very powerful because it is so meaningful for Dawn. It's heartbreaking, and at the same time, she really steps up and she draws on her own strength to be able to give Amanda what Amanda needs in that moment, the encouragement and the knowledge that Amanda is chosen. I talked about the final confrontation. It's between protagonist and antagonist. So Dawn is the protagonist, but who is the antagonist? It's not really Amanda. Amanda hasn't been trying to fight against Dawn, and that is the antagonist's one job, to fight against, to push against, to thwart the protagonist. So who is the antagonist here? We have a sort of amorphous one. It is really the Slayer line, the destiny, the lore. Dawn is excluded because she's not a Slayer or a potential Slayer. The episode deals with that by having different characters stand in or illustrate or act for that concept. Otherwise, it would be people just arguing about the Slayer line. And we do get a little bit of that with Anya saying, sharp, sharp knives, brutal. Willow saying, but it's power, you're tapped into it. So there is a little bit of debate about what that whole concept means, what that destiny means. And that pushes back against Dawn. So in that sense, they are representing destiny, the Slayer line. Buffy is as well in the very beginning by focusing only on the potentials and the mission, which Buffy has to do. I don't think that makes her a bad sister. This is apocalyptic, more so probably than the other apocalypses or apocalypsi that she has faced. And she doesn't see Dawn's feelings. She doesn't see how Dawn is left out, and she doesn't note Dawn's contribution. So she is the Slayer line. The Bringers are as well, though they are evildoers. They are the powerful force that spots the potential, that conveys to Dawn the final blow. She is not a potential. So that is how you deal with an antagonist that is basically a philosophy or an academic concept. We're now in the falling action where we tie up loose ends and resolve subplots. Buffy and Spike race up the stairs. They have found Dawn and Amanda based on that locator spell. Amanda's already fighting the Bringers using that pole. Everyone else joins in. Amanda stakes a vampire, though she's confused about all of it. But the vampire and the Bringers are defeated, and the battle is over. Amanda, now a little angry as well as confused, says 1 minute she's in swing choir, and the next, what the hell is going on? And she adds that Buffy told her to come to her with problems. A vampire attacks. Problem. Then she goes to Buffy's house and an orange cloud hits her, and Dawn says she was at the doorway. This is where it hits Dawn how it is that there was such confusion over the spell, and it tells the audience that as well. Amanda says she got dizzy and discombobulated, something that Willow warned would likely happen to the potential Slayer when the spell hit, and Dawn fills Buffy in that it was Willow's spell and Amanda is the potential Slayer. This is a wonderful quick explanation of what happened so that the audience knows why we thought the spell hit Dawn. That is key, because otherwise, if you don't explain that, it just feels like you were completely unfair and you tricked the audience. Maybe this rant by Amanda justifies a tiny bit that long first scene with her and Buffy, because she says, "You told me to come to you with problems." I still think we don't really need it. The scene cuts to the Summers' living room. The potentials talk about the battle. They all feel so confident now. It was such a rush. Then they ask Amanda about taking a vampire out solo. What was that like? Amanda tells them about it. They're all so excited. And they talk about realizing in one instant that your whole life is different. Dawn watches quietly from the other room and looks sad on that line. And Dawn had two instances. She thought she was a potential, her whole life was different, and then so soon after realized she was not, and it changed her whole life again. These quiet moments, Dawn's sadness in the beginning, her look in the mirror, committing to help Amanda, standing here listening, show both her fear and her excitement about being a potential slayer, her desire to be part of this destiny, and yet understanding the danger it poses. And then when she hands over that pole to Amanda, we see how much the mission and doing the right thing matter to Dawn. It is not just about wanting to be part of this as a potential. It's about being part of the mission in any way she can, doing what's right. And she hands that over to Amanda. She doesn't sulk. She doesn't get angry. She acts in the best way possible to prepare Amanda, to give Amanda the best chance, and to help the cause. Buffy asks Dawn if she's okay, so she picks up a little on Dawn's sadness, but doesn't think any more about it when Dawn says she's just thinking about doing more research. They've got to get a jump on the first. And Buffy says that sounds good. She then takes the other potentials to the basement. They need to get Amanda up to speed. Amanda and Dawn exchange smiles as Amanda follows Buffy. Dawn then sits down at a desk and opens an old book. Xander is in the dining room too. He's alone with Dawn, and he talks about it being a harsh gig for the potentials. Danger, destiny, they might die. Dawn says they can handle it. Xander agrees, but he adds that not one of them will ever know, not even Buffy, how much harder it is for, quote, the rest of us. Xander goes on, 7 years, Dawn, working with the Slayer, seeing my friends get more and more powerful. A witch, a demon. Hell, I could fit Oz in my shaving kit, but come a full moon, he had a wolfy mojo not to be messed with. Powerful, all of them. And I'm the guy who fixes the windows. Dawn tells him he had that sexy army training for a while, and the windows did need fixing. He tells her he saw what she did. She thought she was all special, Ms. Sunnydale, but when she realized she wasn't, she immediately handed over her power. And he says, they'll never know how tough it is, Dawnie, to be the one who isn't chosen, to live so near to the spotlight and never step in it. But I know. I see more than anybody realizes because nobody's watching me. I saw you last night. I see you working here today. You're not special. You're extraordinary. She looks teary, and Xander kisses her forehead, and Dawn says, maybe that's your power. Xander asks what, and Dawn says, seeing, knowing. He smiles and says, maybe it is. Maybe I should get a cape. He leaves, Dawn nods to herself and goes back to her book, and that's the end of the episode. This last exchange is so powerful, and it speaks to the audience. Because most people aren't heroes, not just in the way Buffy is, because she's supernatural, but in the natural world way. Most people are not acting on a giant scale, but it tells us and tells Dawn that being there for others matters, working toward a goal or a mission matters, including in a quiet way, in an unnoticed way, as a lot of labor is, and that's especially true for women in most cultures. And I love that Xander, for all his flaws, is talking about being in what traditionally in the US at least has been thought of as a woman's role of supporting the quote unquote stronger partner. It's so significant for Xander because it illustrates how much he has grown. In the early seasons, that supporting role drove him crazy, and it was all mixed up in masculinity. In the pilot, he wants to help Buffy because Jesse is his friend, and Buffy says something like he's not the Slayer, and he's like, I knew you'd throw that back in my face. Some of his stuff is just ridiculous. Of course he can't be as powerful as the Slayer, but it is really hard for him, and he has a lot of trouble with what does that mean for being a man. And I love that now it does not seem mixed up with that anymore. Xander does not have this same struggle with, is he a man? Can he be masculine and yet not be powerful in a physically powerful way or in a supernatural way as his friends are? He doesn't see it as gendered. He doesn't see it as bad. And he can empathize with Dawn. And much as she did early in the episode, he can feel his feelings about that it's hard, yet recognize that he does contribute and that being there for other people is important and really matters. These last moments are what make the episode work so well for me, despite that the pacing is a bit off. I've talked about the plot turns. I feel like there's a fair amount of filler. The scene with Amanda feels like filler. The scene with the potentials in the bar feels like filler. They had to fill a whole episode. Yet it hit so hard emotionally. In the end, I feel like this is one of the best episodes of season 7. That is it, other than foreshadowing, which does include spoilers. If you don't want to stick around for that, thank you so much for listening. And a special thank you to those in the Patreon community who support the podcast. I hope you'll all come back in 2 weeks, season 7, episode 13. The Killer in Me, where Giles takes the potentials on a quest and Willow falls prey to a dangerous spell. And we are back for foreshadowing, which does include spoilers. Spoiler for what doesn't happen. Dawn is not included in any of the training or fighting. This episode maybe doesn't so much foreshadow that as explain it or make it clear that that's not going to happen. I'm still unclear why. I get that Dawn is not a potential, but we started the season with Buffy training Dawn, and we see in this episode, despite being klutzy, as Anya says, Dawn does a pretty good job. She has learned a lot from Buffy. Now, most likely it's because Buffy doesn't want to risk Dawn, and we'll see this does foreshadow a bit her trying to send Dawn away at the end of the season to keep her out of the final battle entirely. I would have enjoyed, rather than some of the filler in this episode or previous episodes, a little more to show that Buffy has some conflict over that, or a little more to show that that is Buffy's reasoning, because as the season plays out and up to this point, it feels more like Buffy just forgot that she started training Dawn and that Dawn was pretty good. Dawn did pretty good at the end of season 6 as well, and that was a revelation to Buffy, who now seems to have had it go right out of her head. The spike in Buffy interactions, as well as the potentials comments, foreshadow discord with the potentials over Buffy and Spike. As with previous episodes, we get hints here. They don't understand this attraction between Buffy and Spike. They're suspicious of Buffy palling around with demons. When Clem comes up and they hug, it doesn't help. Some of this was seeded by the first acting as Eve. Why is Buffy so worried about Spike? And it continues to undermine their confidence in Buffy, setting up everybody throwing Buffy out. Not that that's the only reason, but it lays the groundwork for that. The conflicts set up as well the continued mixed feelings Buffy will have for Spike. They're going to spend that night together after Buffy is thrown out, where she sleeps next to him Then the next day they have an exchange where he wants to talk about what it means. Buffy is asking, does it have to mean anything? I am dissatisfied with that conversation, and Buffy's mixed feelings here add to that. The reason it's dissatisfying is I feel like the writers don't know what to do, as I mentioned, and that is just going to continue. I love that Spike gives Buffy a lot of strength, but that moment when she says, I love you at the end, I am not sure what we are supposed to believe about that. Some of that is because I feel like it is fan service. They want to hold out this idea of maybe Buffy an angel, and I'll talk about when he reappears, why that is troubling for me. I don't think it fits with everything that's been developed before in this season, but I do suspect that is part of why we get not just Buffy's mixed feelings, but a lot of mixed messages from the writers about Buffy and Spike, because for fans of Buffy and Angel and fans of Buffy and Spike, we're kind of having it both ways. Dawn's comment that she will never be the Slayer unless Buffy dies. First, that might not be true because it might be Faith that has to die to trigger a new Slayer. Setting that aside, it foreshadows that this is an issue that Buffy will solve. Issue is such a boring word, but this is something Buffy will address. She is going to end the Slayer line in a way, end the succession. And the idea that one girl or woman has to die before another can have any power. So I love that that is all foreshadowed here. We have more foreshadowing of the storyteller episode where Andrew finally takes responsibility for what he did for killing Jonathan, because again, we have Andrew grappling with the difference between him and Spike, and Andrew saying, I hate my free will. This could almost be the theme of Storyteller, that he's got to grapple with. He had free will and he had a soul, which I don't think will be directly mentioned, but in the Buffyverse, that means he had a choice and he chose to kill his best friend. Andrew's musing about what if people wriggled out with their skin, as I mentioned, could speak to Andrew's character. Is he wriggling out of his skin and appearing new, but he's really same old Andrew underneath? He's still a snake? Or does that foreshadow the next episode, The Killer in Me, where Willow, in a way, is pulled out of her own skin and becomes first looks like Warren, sounds like Warren, but gradually becomes Warren. I feel like there's a little bit of thematic foreshadowing there. It's not quite shedding her skin because she is becoming someone else, but it touches on that theme, which is kind of fun. I have no idea if that was the writer's intent, but good job on doing it. That's all I have for this episode. Thank you again for listening. Come back in 2 weeks for Season 7, Episode 13, The Killer in Me, where the gang suspects Giles might be the first and Willow literally becomes her worst enemy. You can find back episodes of Buffy and the Art of Story, as well as the Buffy and the Art of Story books and all my fiction at lisalily.com. To support the podcast, hear extra bonus content, and get each regular episode a few days early, join the Patreon community at patreon.com/LisaMLily. That's Lisa, M as in Marie, Lilly. Music for this episode was written and performed by Robert Newcastle. Buffy and the Art of Story is a production of Spiny Woman, LLC. Copyright 2024. All rights reserved.